Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel Code with GoldenCat. Today we'll be talking about method and event binding in Vue. So let's begin. For this tutorial we will be using our same old skeleton project that we used in our previous day. So if anything doesn't look familiar or you do not understand what it means, be sure to check out the previous video. So let's quickly go over what we have here. First, we have this index.html file where we have a div with ID app that has a heading and a paragraph tag. Then in the app.js file, we are just creating a simple Vue application and mounting it on the div having ID as app. Then we have the style.css that contains some custom styles. Now let's go back to our index.html. So let's first understand what is a method. So in basic terms, a method is used to define behavior of a program. So here, suppose if you're creating a form which would require submit button, and when the user clicks on that button, you want it to do something. So that's a behavior. And to define it, you need to create some methods. So let's first try to understand how you can create methods and use them in Vue. So let's go to app.js here. First, for creating a method here, we will define another property of create app, that is methods. This would take in a list of all the methods that your Vue application would use. So let's start by creating a really basic method, get greeting. Now this method would return either hello or goodbye based on an integer value, which we will select based on a random function. So we'll use math.random. So this is a plain old vanilla JavaScript function that returns a value between 0 and 1. Now we'll simply create it as if rnd is smaller than 0.5, we'll simply return hello. Otherwise, we will return goodbye. Now, how we can use this method in our index.html? So here, I am using the message variable right now, and the message contains hello. So if I open this app on Chrome by copying its path, you can see right now it just says hello. But if I use the method here instead of string interpolation, I can simply type in get greeting, and we'll need to use these parentheses since it's a method. And then if I reload this page again and again, you can see sometimes it gives goodbye and sometimes hello. So this is a really basic method that we have just created, but still it's a method nonetheless. Now that we understand how a simple method works in it, let's try creating a more complex method. So for that, we'll first need to create two buttons here. One would be add one, and then another button that would be remove one. And then we can simply create a paragraph tag. So what we'll do now is create a variable here, that is counter, and we'll initialize this to 0, and then we'll use this counter inside here. So what we are trying to build is we will create two buttons here. If I go to the HTML page and then reload it, clicking on add one should add one in it, and then clicking on remove one should remove one from it. So let's do that using a method. So to do that, we will need to create some methods. Now you can also do that in the HTML. So let's begin by doing that here. So for defining a method or defining an event, we will need to use a directive called on, and then we are listening for an event called click. So whenever this button gets clicked, this method would be executed. So right now we are not creating a method, so we can simply write counter plus plus. So this is equivalent to calling it as counter equals to counter plus one. That is, it adds one value to counter. And then in the next button, we would use on click counter minus minus. Now if I reload my program and then use it, you can see add one adds one value, and if I click on remove one, it also removes one value. Now this works fine, but when working with a production environment, we have to separate our business logic from index.html. So we could use the counter plus plus and counter minus minus here, but it is generally not a good practice to do that here. We need to do that in the app.js file. So for that, we will add two methods here called add, which would do something like this dot counter equals to or this dot counter plus plus. And then another method called remove, which would do this dot counter minus minus. Now you might be wondering why we are using this here. So if I do not use this and just call it as counter, so what would happen is when Vue tries to find this counter object, it is not able to find it. It won't be able to read this as a data value that we have defined in the data property. So to make a reference to the data properties that we have defined here, we will need to use this here. Now let's go back to our on click and change this to use our add method. Now, since we are not passing any arguments to that method, you can simply type in its name, and then we will use remove here. Now, if I reload this program and then click on add one, it adds one value. And if I click on remove one, it removes one value. Now, if you're not sure about what events are available for a particular HTML element, you can simply go to the MSDN documentation and find what events are available for a particular HTML tag. So you can simply type in MSDN documentation input event, and then you would get a list of all the events that this particular tag has or supports. Now that we understand a little bit more complex method and how it works, let's make it a little bit more complex. So suppose if I don't want it to add one value in it, instead I want it to add like 10, and I want it to remove 5 from it. I can do that by passing in arguments to this function. So how I would do that is I would go to my app.js file, and here I would write an argument called num. You can use any name and then type in this dot counter plus num, and we will do the same thing here as well. And use negative here. Now to pass num to these functions, how we will do that is we go to the index.html page, and here where we are only passing the name, we will use the parenthesis here and then pass in the value as well. That is 10 and 5 here. Now if I reload my program and then try it, you can see it adds 10 value here, but it removes 5 from it. So this is how you can work with arguments in a method in Vue.